Wonderful. Are there any questions?
Governor, this is a one-way signal, right?
That's right.
Once students complete their assignments, how are they supposed to turn them in?
Okay.
I'm actually going to ask our Vice President of Education, Dr. Stephanie Frazier, to elaborate on that a little bit.
Good morning. I apologize. Can you repeat the question?
It's a one-way signal. So once students get the information and they complete the assignment, how are they supposed to turn in that assignment?
So we are working with our pilot districts to make sure that we have a model in place, and the models are really going to vary depending on the needs of the student. We've talked about a number of different scenarios, one being something as simple as establishing a conference call so that the teacher says, you have received this information, here's my Google voice number, or here's a line. We're going to speak at this particular time during this particular day about the items that you have received. We also have talked about taking advantage of the mobile hotspots that are in place around the state. So instead of a student having to go to the hotspot to get the information, to complete the information and then upload it, with Datacasting they will already have it, so they can go to those hotspots and upload it at that time. And then if you're looking at AV schedules, a student may be able to have a shorter amount of time so they can get the Datacasting when they return to school to pick up information. They can share the assignments back that way. So it is one way, but certainly we are trying to get the information to them, and we will have a number of different options for them to return it.
Do we know how many students lack sufficient internet to actually complete their assignments despite the Wi-Fi hotspots?
Thank you. Stay close. Make sure I answer this correctly. We know that we've distributed a little over 80,000 Wi-Fis already to students. And we know that those are the students who qualified for the 250% below poverty. I think I've heard about 5,000 students in the 3 districts that have already been identified as those that the Wi-Fi may not be working really well out at their home, and so they would be likely to use the Datacasting. We also know that as students have registered, there are some families who can't afford Wi-Fi or who may not have Wi-Fi who were not on that initial qualification list of 250% below poverty. So we're asking school districts right now to collect that information and to let us know. With the flexibility that the legislature, it appears that they're going to give us through the Senate Finance Committee yesterday on our CARES Act funding that we can reimburse. Looks like there's some possibilities there that we will be able, at least through December 31st, to assist in buying more if necessary.
Why those 3 districts for the pilot?
So there were a number of factors that went into establishing the districts. We looked primarily at the group of districts who have been identified as being disproportionately impacted by COVID. There's about 34 districts in that group. We also looked at the relationships that we have with districts based on other projects that we have in play, as well as recommendations from the State Department of Ed and those districts who have a large number of students without broadband access. So there's a large number to pull from, and we certainly hope that we can touch each of those areas. But the 3 that we picked were the ones that rose to the top during the assessment.
You say disproportionately impacted. What does that mean?
So there was a scale with a number of different factors that looked at the number of COVID cases. They looked at broadband access. It looked at household income. So there was a formula at play that was identified by the State Department of Education as we were working with the governor's office to do a number of different projects.
So we're starting with 3 districts. How soon are we moving across the state?
So we are right now working diligently to deploy receivers in those 3 districts, though that will start in October. We are hopeful that we will get additional receivers into households later this fall, but definitely at the top of the school year we will begin to get closer to scalability in terms of reaching those 5,000.
And obviously, school districts have started across South Carolina. Last day was yesterday, last day for all of them to be on board. Why are we so late in doing this?
Well, I will say that certainly data casting is a technology, and certainly my president may want to speak more to this, but we explored this technology in response to the pandemic, and it is certainly something that has been at play, but we have spent the past several months transitioning something that, was designed for public safety to support education. So it's been moving as quickly, I think, as we can. Do you want to add something? Okay.
We have been working all summer on this. It takes a while. In fact, the grant that we wrote to support the families part of this that I talked about we started working on that as soon as it was announced, late April, May. We started writing that, so it takes a while. I will say, though, that our school district folks are in very close contact with families, and many of them, there are different models happening. But for those students, if we know that the Wi-Fi is not working, they are making strides to correct that. I know particularly down in Calhoun County, for instance, they're actually bringing in some students, and we're offering our school buses to bring students to either the school or a place where Wi-Fi is available. So it's not ideal. They can't work on that all day long. But we have been working all summer together to get to the spot where we are right now. But we're not going to just leave a child stranded. We've given permission for buses to be used and for some type of response to every family if they don't have Wi-Fi in their house.
And just to add to that a little bit, the one thing that I wanted to mention is that what we're talking about today, specifically with data casting, didn't exist 4 months ago. This is something that's been created, as Superintendent Spearman said, over the past 4 months, and there's been a lot of hard work and a lot of diligent effort that's been placed into it. There's a technological component that has to be ordered from a manufacturer, implemented, tested, and deployed throughout the state as well. That work started very early on. As a matter of fact, as soon as we launched our at-home learning initiative last March, we started working on this project. And it's taken some time for all of it to come together, for the funding to come in. But honestly, I'd have to say, if you look at the pace at which this has been made available, it's kind of record-breaking in my mind. And there's been a lot of hard work and a lot of effort that's been put into it.
Yes, ma'am. Over here. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question on how exactly it'll kind of work. So will the teacher need to record and then that will play, or can you kind of go into exactly what the rundown of this will look like on the student's end, and then also what the teachers will have to do to prepare their lessons and make sure that for different grade levels and all of that kind of layout?
There's several scenarios that we've outlined related to that, and I'll let Dr. Frazier speak a little bit more about that in a moment. But as part of that, too, one of the things that we really like about this system is its flexibility and how agile it is for the teachers to work with. You've often heard us refer to this throughout this meeting or this conference as a pilot project. And that was somewhat done intentional. It was done in a way so that we could work with teachers and administrators to develop a tool that was useful and relevant for them and the students in the classroom or at home. Because we didn't just want to provide a service and say, here you go, figure out how to work with it and figure out what to do with it. It's something that Dr. Frazier and her team, and working with our partners, has really designed from the ground up to be utilized by the teachers and the students in a way that's meaningful and impactful for them. Dr. Frazier, if you'd like to expand on that a little.
So the interface is designed to simulate, to the extent possible, a web experience. So what the students will see on their end looks very much like a web page. They will be able to click on something and it will say, hey, you have new content, almost like you have new mail. They can click on it to see the files that have been data cast to them. We are working with our districts in the pilot to make sure that on the teacher end, they understand the interface, and it really will just be an intuitive point and click. If they are uploading something to their learning management system, then they will be able to upload it for data casting as well.
You had one, sir?
Yeah, we expect this to be rolled out to other areas of the state.
We're working on a plan for that. Talking with Superintendent Spearman and her team, trying to identify the areas that are most needed. We focused on the pilot districts that we've been talking about based on the information that Dr. Frazier shared earlier, but we are looking at a scalability approach to this as well, and trying to identify the areas that are most needed and most impacted. And as Superintendent Spearman referenced earlier, we know we're going to find some areas that might be a one-off. where there's just an area that has absolutely no service or very limited service, and this is the only option they have. And so we would obviously, pull things together and make something happen in those communities as they're discovered.
Yes, ma'am.
So where will students get this equipment, and will they get the computer or tablet, or is it just the tuner and antenna that will be provided with?
There's essentially 3 components that are needed to make this work. One is the device which you mentioned, which is a Wi-Fi enabled device. The other is an antenna and a receiver, and there's a couple of different options we have for the deployment of those devices. Dr. Frazier, I'll let you share some of your experience with the districts that you've had so far.
So, to answer your last question, there is some funding allocated to support devices for those districts where students may not be one-to-one. So there is funding set aside for that. In terms of the equipment, we are working with the pilot districts to make sure that in a way they would manage the MiFi program or the Chromebook program, that we would have some sort of coordinated pickup for students. If we need to take them, particularly during this pilot, to students' homes, we have committed ourselves and our resources to making that happen, knowing that there will be a more coordinated effort as things begin to scale.
All right. Last question.
If you could clarify where the money is coming from, I've heard several sources. Is it coming from the...
I think I can answer that well. There are actually 2 different sources. One, CARES Act funding from that the General Assembly has purposed for this, from the large amount that came through the governor's office and the General Assembly is appropriating. The other amount is through the $15 million grant that the Department of Education receives, the Rethink Learning grant. And as I mentioned, that grant will support the purchase of the equipment that the students need in their home. The other parts of that grant are a repository, a learning repository that can be used by Datacasting, the teachers involved with that, but for all teachers in South Carolina, a place where they can now go to receive materials, resources. We've been wanting this for a long, long time, and finally able to purchase that through, because it's so needed for the COVID impact, through this grant that we've received. 1.3 million from the General Assembly, and $2.4 million from the grant that we received over a 3-year period.
Okay. Y'all, thank you very much for coming. Doctor, we so appreciate you being here today.
Yes.
And we'll be announcing more progress at a later date. Thank you very much.